Hello, hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are reading The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. But first, reading updates. I, I fully planned on starting to read Akin by Emma Donoghue, and I didn't. So I haven't even started it. Still know nothing what it's about, nothing like that. I also did not start Aviva versus the Dybbuk yet. Here is what the cover looks like. It's super short, um, but I haven't started it yet. I did read more in there, so I am over halfway through. I'll probably finish in like 2 more sittings. So I'm enjoying it. I just started the third part, and we have gotten to characters having repeat chapters, so that's kind of nice. And also slowly seeing how the characters are meshed with each other, and that's kind of cool too, because like the first through, you're not really, it seems very vignette, and like the theme just being that they are indigenous descendants, but there's so much more than that in how they're connected and how they interact with each other, and it's actually kind of interesting. So I am reading that, and it is a community read for Chicago. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this, but they do have a bunch of book discussions for this book, and they have a bunch of programs that focus on the themes of the book. And then also in November, the author Tommy Orange is going to speak. And I am happily going to be watching it live streamed on YouTube so that I can have my snacks and my sweatpants. I know I've said that before. And that still reigns true for being a primary reason why I'm going to stay home. So, let's do it. Let's start. Phantom of the Opera. I have never read this before. I have also never seen any adaptation of it. So this is a completely new story for me. The only thing I know is that this guy is very disfigured and wears like a partial mask, and there's a ton of candles and something about a chandelier. That is all I know about it. So, let's do it. Am I uncultured swine for not knowing anything about it? Probably. Probably, but let's remedy this. Let's remedy it starting today. So I do have it digitally, and before like the book like super starts, like officially starts, there is a section about the author. So we'll start with that. You've seen 3 adaptations but never read the book. I'm wondering how close the book is. Because you know how spin-offs and adaptations are, or inspired bys are. Sometimes they're very true, and other times you're like, you've changed a lot. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. So yes, it is by Gaston Leroux, and let's read a little bit about our bud first. Gaston Leroux, the prolific French mystery and horror novelist, best remembered today as the author of The Phantom of the Opera, was born in Paris on May 6, 1868. The eldest child of affluent shopkeepers, Leroux was educated at a boarding school in Normandy, where he developed a passion for literature and later prepared for a legal career. At the age of 20, he inherited a substantial legacy from his father, but he quickly squandered it on Paris nightlife. Combining his love of the theater and his knowledge of the law, Leroux found work as a drama critic and investigative court reporter with L'Echo de Paris in 1890. His exclusive interviews with distinguished public figures such as Duc d'Orleans. Oh man, there's a lot of fun names coming up. Pretender to the French throne, and Baron Nils Nordenskjöld, the Swedish Antarctic explorer, won him a wide audience. In 1892, Leroux was hired by the influential daily newspaper Le Matin as a foreign correspondent, and over the next 15 years, he filed stories from trouble spots throughout Europe, Africa, and Asia. A master of disguise, he covered the Russian Revolution of 1905 and posed as an Arab while reporting on European imperialism in Morocco, an assignment that nearly cost him his life. This guy is like super interesting. Huh. Leroux's first success as a novelist came in 1908 with the publication of Le Mystère de la Chambre Jaune, The Mystery of the Yellow Room, a locked room detective story in the tradition of Edgar Allan Poe's The Murders in the Rue Morgue and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Adventure of the Speckled Band. The novel introduces readers to Joseph Joffin Rouletabille. Oh man, all these French names. Sorry. A brilliant young reporter turned detective who possesses the same powers of logic and reasoning as Sherlock Holmes. I knew that I must do better than Poe and Conan Doyle, Leroux recalled, so I decided to have a murder committed in a room which was hermetically sealed, as closed as a safe, in fact. The Mystery of the Yellow Room is generally recognized on the strength of its central puzzle as one of the classic examples of the genre, reflected Howard Haycraft, an expert on crime fiction. For sheer plot manipulation and ratiocination, no simpler word will describe the quality of its Gaelic logic. It has seldom been surpassed. It remains, after a generation of imitation, the most brilliant of all locked room novels. A sequel, The Perfume of the Lady in Black, confirmed Rouletabille's reputation as an amateur sleuth who could invariably outwit professional detectives. Leroux subsequently turned out 5 more mysteries, as well as a series of detective novels featuring a magician named Chéri Bibi. Foreign names are difficult. Yes, absolutely. I'm sure they are easily distinguishable and pronounced if that is your language, but French is not my language. Intrigued by the legend of a mysterious man who supposedly inhabited the subterranean depths of the Paris Opera, Leroux wrote The Phantom of the Opera. Ironically, the novel was virtually ignored by reviewers when it was first published in 1910 and did not achieve international acclaim until 1925, when the American actor Lon Chaney created the title role in a film that endures as a classic of the silent screen era. Since then, innumerable adaptations for stage, screen, and television have ensured the book's immortality. The Phantom of the Opera is a truly fabulous fiction, judged the noted authority on Gothic literature, Leonard Woolf. A novel in which so many fables are at work that we experience it as a multi-dimensional allegory. If Leroux's characters do not become real people, they become something perhaps even grander, recognizable elements in an allegory of pain, compassion, and redemption, to which we find ourselves entirely responsive. Writing in Time magazine, the critic Richard Corliss agreed. The Phantom is a figure of power and poignance, horror and mystery. He dwells in the fetid cellar of the subconscious. From those depths rises the music of passions we hardly dare attend. He is the id, aching for the ideal, loathsomeness, wanting to be loved, unknown fear reaching up to touch or break our hearts. He is kin to Pygmalion, Cyrano, Quasimodo, Dracula, the Elephant Man, and King Kong. Artists isolated in their genius, beasts pining for beauty. With The Phantom of the Opera, Leroux reached the height of his literary powers, asserted the English editor and critic Peter Haining. Gaston Leroux was more than just a brilliant writer of weird fiction. He was a master of grand guignol, Guignol. What? That's fine. Gaston Leroux suffered from a lingering illness during the last 2 years of his life and may never have seen the movie version of The Phantom of the Opera, which was so instrumental in securing him lasting fame. He died in nice of uremic poisoning on April 16th, 1927. Several years earlier, a critic writing in the French newspaper L'Illustration had hailed Leroux as an eternal reporter who could extract a story out of even the most unlikely situation. In praising his resourcefulness, the journalist observed, Leroux has been a lawyer, a legal chronicler, stage critic, dramatist, newspaper correspondent, globetrotter, novelist, all that, and he remained the reporter. It is not impossible that he may one day write an opera, and if he does, be sure that he will have taken the idea from his reporting. To be a reporter means to hold in one's grasp a piece of life, to feel it tremble when it comes in contact with one's fingers. It means to give it life or to blow it out of one's own breath, to clothe it or lay it bare. To do that, treasures of fine feeling are needed. Gaston Leroux is in possession of them, and he joins to them an imagination which is all his own. Introduction. Anne Perry. Today, most of us know the story of The Phantom of the Opera from the wildly successful musical. Unless your name is Mooog. But not even the greatest librettist or composer living could condense all the subtlety or the tragic power of the book into one evening's drama on the stage. Nor could they catch in the cleverest sets the whole mystery and magic, or the darkness and the intricacy of the Paris opera itself. Much of this is perhaps not literal, but in the portrayal of the characters. Theirs is a world to itself, peopled by scores of singers, dancers, and other workers, fugitives from life and mischance who find refuge there. Some have the sole occupation to open doors, others to close them. There are children who dance and dream of the future, and old men who run errands, fetch and carry, and remember the past. There are rooms beyond rooms, passages under and over other passages, and endless shifting walls and hidden pivots and trap doors, cellars beneath the cellars. Some of it is beautiful, some terrible. Always, everywhere, there is the opera ghost, the angel of music, and the passion and the glory of music itself. The novel begins very slowly, with the change in management as the old duo leaves for no apparent reason, and the new duo takes over. Okay. This is starting to sound like maybe I shouldn't read the introduction, because it already is talking about, like, well, everybody knows this. And then it's going to start talking about the book itself and seemingly a recap. Yeah, it's totally a recap of what's happening. Okay. Just kidding. I'm not going to read the introduction. Just kidding. I'm not going to read the introduction. Okay. Skipping the introduction because spoilers. It's already assuming that you know the story. And because I don't, spoilers. Okay. Prologue, in which the author of this singular work informs the reader how he acquired the certainty that the opera ghost really existed. The opera ghost really existed. He was not, as was long believed, a creature of the imagination of the artists, the superstition of the managers, or a product of the absurd and impressionable brains of the young ladies of the ballet, their mothers, the box-keepers, the cloakroom attendants, or the concierge. Yes, he existed in flesh and blood, although he assumed the complete appearance of a real phantom. That is to say, of a spectral shade. When I began to ransack the archives of the National Academy of Music, I was at once struck by the surprising coincidences between the phenomena ascribed to the ghost and the most extraordinary and fantastic tragedy that ever excited the Paris upper classes, and I soon conceived the idea that this tragedy might reasonably be explained by the phenomena in question. The events do not date more than 30 years back, and it would not be difficult to find at the present day, in the foyer of the ballet, old men of the highest respectability, men upon whose word one could absolutely rely, who would remember as though they happened yesterday the mysterious and dramatic conditions that attended the kidnapping of Christine Daaé, the disappearance of the Vicomte de Chagny, and the death of his elder brother, Count Philippe, whose body was found on the bank of the lake that existed in the lower cellars of the opera on the Rue Scribe side. But none of those witnesses had until that day thought that there was any reason for connecting the more or less legendary figure of the opera ghost with that terrible story. The truth was slow to enter my mind, puzzled by an inquiry that at every moment was complicated by events which, at first sight, might be looked upon as superhuman, and more than once I was within an ace of abandoning a task in which I was exhausting myself in the hopeless pursuit of a vain image. At last, I received the proof that my presentiments had not deceived me, and I was rewarded for all my efforts on the day when I acquired the certainty that the opera ghost was more than a mere shade. On that day, I had spent long hours over the memoirs of a manager, the light and frivolous work of the too skeptical Moncharmin, who, during his term at the opera, understood nothing of the mysterious behavior of the ghost, and who was making all the fun of it that he could at the very moment when he became the first victim of the curious financial operation that went on inside the magic envelope. I had just left the library in despair when I met the delightful acting manager of our National Academy, who stood chatting on a landing with a lively and well-groomed little old man, to whom he introduced me happily. The acting manager knew all about my investigations, and how eagerly and unsuccessfully I had been trying to discover the whereabouts of the examining magistrate in the famous Chagny case, M. Feur. Nobody knew what had become of him, alive or dead, and here he was, back from Canada, where he had spent 15 years, and the first thing he had done, on his return to Paris, was to come to the secretarial offices at the opera and ask for a free seat. The little old man was M. Feur himself. We spent a good part of the evening together, and he told me the whole Chagny case as he had understood it at the time. He was bound to conclude in favor of the madness of the Viscount and the accidental death of the elder brother, for lack of evidence to the contrary. But he was nevertheless persuaded that a terrible tragedy had taken place between the two brothers in connection with Christine Daaé. He could not tell me what became of Christine or the Viscount. When I mentioned the ghost, he only laughed. He, too, had been told of the curious manifestations that seemed to point to the existence of an abnormal being, residing in one of the most mysterious corners of the opera, and he knew the story of the envelope, but he had never seen anything in it worthy of his attention as magistrate in charge of the case, and it was as much as he had done to listen to the evidence of a witness who appeared of his own accord and declared that he had often met the ghost. This witness was none other than the man whom all Paris called the Persian, who was well known to every subscriber to the opera. The magistrate took him for a visionary. I was immediately interested by this story of the Persian. I wanted, if there were still time, to find this valuable and eccentric witness. My luck began to improve, and I discovered him in his little flat in the Rue de Rivoli, I almost read that as ravioli. Is it time for dinner yet? The Rue de Rivoli, where he had lived ever since and where he died 5 months after my visit. I was at first inclined to be suspicious, but when the Persian had told me, with childlike candor, all that he knew about the ghost, and had handed me the proofs of the ghost's existence, including the strange correspondence of Christine, to do as I was pleased with, I was no longer able to doubt. No, the ghost was not a myth. I have, I know, been told that this correspondence may have been forged from first to last by a man whose imagination had certainly been fed on the most seductive tales. But fortunately I discovered some of Christine's writing outside the famous bundle of letters, and, on a comparison between the two, all my doubts were removed. I also went into the past history of the Persian and found that he was an upright man, incapable of inventing a story that might have defeated the end of justice. This, moreover, was the opinion of the more serious people who, at one time or other, were mixed up in the case, who were friends of the Chagny family, to whom I showed all my documents and set forth all my inferences. In this connection, I should like to print a few lines which I received from General. Sir, I cannot urge you too strongly to publish the results of your inquiry. I remember perfectly that, a few weeks before the disappearance of that great singer, Christine Daaé, and the tragedy which threw the whole of the Faubourg Saint-Germain into mourning, there was a great deal of talk in the foyer of the ballet on the subject of the ghost, and I believe that it only ceased to be discussed in consequence of the later affair that excited us all so greatly. But if it be possible, as after hearing you, I believe, to explain the tragedy through the ghost, then I beg you, sir, to talk to us about the ghost again. Mysterious though the ghost may at first appear, he will always be more easily explained than the dismal story in which malevolent people have tried to picture two brothers killing each other, who had worshipped each other all their lives. Believe me, etc. Lastly, with my bundles of papers in hand, I once more went over the ghost's vast domain, the huge building which he had made his kingdom. All that my eyes saw, all that my mind perceived, corroborated the Persian's documents precisely, and a wonderful discovery crowned my labors in a very definite fashion. It will be remembered that, later, when digging in the substructure of the opera, before burying the phonographic records of the artist's voice, the workmen laid bare a corpse. Well, I was at once able to prove that this corpse was that of the opera ghost. I made the acting manager put this proof to the test with his own hand, and it is now a matter of supreme indifference to me if the papers pretend that the body was that of the victim of the Commune. The wretches who were massacred under the Commune in the cellars of the opera were not buried on this side. I will tell where their skeletons can be found in a spot not very far from that immense crypt, which was stocked during the siege with all sorts of provisions. I came upon this track just when I was looking for the remains of the opera ghost, which I should never have discovered but for the unheard-of chance described above. But we will return to the corpse and what ought to be done with it. For the present, I must conclude this very necessary introduction by thanking M. Mifroid, who was the commissary of police called in for the first investigations after the disappearance of Christine Daaé, M. Remy, the late secretary, M. Mercier, the late acting manager, M. Gabriel, the late chorus master, and more particularly Madame la Baronne de Castellat Barbezac, who was once the little Meg of the story, and who is not ashamed of it, the most charming star of our admirable corps de ballet, the eldest daughter of the worthy Madame Giry, now deceased, who had charge of the ghost's private box. All these were of the greatest assistance to me, and, thanks to them, I shall be able to produce, reproduce those hours of sheer love and terror in their smallest details before the reader's eyes. And I should be ungrateful indeed if I omitted, while standing on the threshold of this dreadful and veracious story, to thank the present management of the opera, which has so kindly assisted me in all my inquiries, and M. Messenger in particular, together with M. Gabion, the acting manager, and that most amiable of men, the architect entrusted in the preservation of the building, who did not hesitate to lend me the works of Charles Garnier, although he was almost sure that I would never return them to him. Lastly, I must pay a public tribute to the generosity of my friend and former collaborator, M. J. Lacroze, who allowed me to dip into his splendid theatrical library and to borrow the rarest editions of books by which he set great store. Gaston Leroux. Okay, so we have proof that there really was not, that there really was a ghost, and that something made these two brothers who have loved each other for forever turn on each other and, murder. And more murder, and body of the ghost has been found in the sublevel of the opera. And Gaston talked to the investigator of this whole case and has all of these bundles of papers. And now we are going into the story. Very exciting. All right. Chapter 1. Is it the ghost? It was the evening on which Mademoiselle de Bienne and Poligny, the managers of the opera, were giving a last gala performance to mark their retirement. Suddenly, the dressing room of La Sorelli, one of the principal dancers, was invaded by half a dozen young ladies of the ballet, who had come up from the stage after dancing. I don't know why dancing is in quotes, but dancing pursuit. They rushed in amid great confusion, some giving vent to forced and unnatural laughter, others to cries of terror. Sorelli, who wished to be alone for a moment to run through the speech which she was to make at the resigning managers, looked around angrily at the mad and tumultuous crowd. It was little James, the girl with the tilted nose, the forget-me-not eyes, the red rose cheeks, and the lily-white neck and shoulders, who gave the explanation in a trembly voice. "It's the ghost." And she locked the door. The author feels like it was hardly dancing. I know. The dancing. If that's what you want to call it. Totally throwing shade. Absolutely. Sorelli's dressing room was fitted up with official commonplace elegance. A pier glass, a sofa, a dressing table, and a cupboard or two provided the necessary furniture. On the walls hung a few engravings, relics of the mother, who had known the glories of the old opera in the Rue Le Pelletier, portraits of Vestris, Gardel, Dupont, Bigottini. But the room seemed a palace to the brats of the corps de ballet, who were lodged in common dressing rooms, where they spent their time singing, quarreling, smacking the dressers and hairdressers, and buying one another glasses of cassis, beer, or even rum, until the call-boy's bell rang. Sorelli was very suspicious. She shuddered when she heard little James speak of the ghost, called her a silly little fool, and then, as she was the first to believe in ghosts in general, and the opera ghost in particular, asked at once for details. "Well, have you seen him?" "As plainly as I see you now," said little James, whose legs were giving way beneath her, and she dropped with a moan into a chair. Thereupon little Geary, the girl with eyes black as sloes, I don't know what that is, hair black as ink, a swarthy complexion, and a poor little skin stretched over poor little bones. Little Geary added, "If that's the ghost, he's very ugly." "Oh, yes," cried the chorus of ballet girls. And they all began to talk together. The ghost had appeared to them in the shape of a gentleman in dress clothes, who had suddenly stood before them in the passage, without their knowing where he came from. He seemed to have come straight through the wall. So possibly just a regular person in regular clothes, looking nice. It's not very nice to just assume that everybody's a ghost. "Pooh," said one of them, who had more or less kept her head. "You see the ghosts everywhere." And it was true. For several months there had been nothing discussed at the opera but this ghost in dress clothes, who stalked about the building from top to bottom, like a shadow who spoke to nobody, to whom nobody dared speak, and who vanished as soon as he was seen, no one knowing how or where. As became a real ghost, he made no noise in walking. People... Did I skip? No. Okay. People began by laughing and making fun of this spectre dressed like a man of fashion or an undertaker, but the ghost legend soon swelled to enormous proportions among the corps de ballet. All the girls pretended to have met this supernatural being more or less often, and those who laughed the loudest were not the most at ease. When he did not show himself, he betrayed his presence or his passing by accident, comic or serious, for which the general superstition held him responsible. He had anyone met with a fall, or suffered a practical joke at the hands of one of the other girls, or lost a powder puff, it was at once the fault of the ghost, of the opera ghost. After all, who had seen him? You meet so many men in dress clothes at the opera who are not ghosts, but this dress suit had a peculiarity, I said it, of its own. It covered a skeleton, at least, so the ballet girl said. And, of course, it had a death's head. Was all this serious? The truth is that the idea of the skeleton came from the description of the ghost given by Joseph Bouquet, the chief scene shifter, who had really seen the ghost. He had run up against the ghost on the little staircase by the footlights which lead to the cellars. He had seen him for a second, for the ghost had fled, and to any one who cared to listen, he said, "He is extraordinarily thin, and his dress coat hangs on a skeleton frame. His eyes are so deep that you can hardly see the fixed pupils. You just see two big black holes, as in a dead man's skull. His skin, which is stretched across his bones like a drumhead, is not white, but a nasty yellow. His nose is so little worth talking about that you can't see it in side face. And the absence of that nose is a horrible thing to look at. All the hair he has is 3 or 4 long, dark locks on his forehead and behind his ears." This chief scene shifter was a serious, sober, steady man, very slow at imagining things. His words were received with interest and amazement, and soon there were other people to say that they too had met a man in dress clothes with a death's head on his shoulders. Sensible men who had wind of the story began to say that Joseph Bouquet had been the victim of a joke played by one of his assistants. And then, one after the other, there came a series of incidents so curious and so inexplicable that the very shrewdest people began to feel uneasy. For instance, a fireman is a brave fellow. He fears nothing, least of all fire. Well, the fireman in question, who had gone to make a round of inspection in the cellars and who, it seems, had ventured a little farther than usual, suddenly reappeared on the stage, pale, scared, trembling, with his eyes starting out of his head, and practically fainted in the arms of the proud mother of little James. And why? Because he had seen coming toward him at the level of his head, but without a body attached to it, a head of fire. And as I said, a fireman is not afraid of fire. Fireman's name was Pampin. Pampin. The corps de ballet was flung into consternation. At first sight, this fiery head in no way corresponded with Joseph Bouquet's description of the ghost, but the young ladies soon persuaded themselves that the ghost had several heads, which he changed about as he pleased. And, of course, they at once imagined that they were in the greatest danger. Once a fireman did not hesitate to faint. Leaders and front row and back row girls alike had plenty of excuses for the fright that made them quicken their pace when passing some dark corner or ill-lighted corridor. Sorelli herself, on the day after the adventure of the fireman, placed a horseshoe on the table in front of the stage doorkeeper's box, which everyone who entered the opera otherwise than as a spectre must touch before setting foot on the first tread of the staircase. This horseshoe was not invented by me, any more than any other part of the story, alas, and may still be seen on the table in the passage outside the stage doorkeeper's box, when you enter the opera through the court known as the Cour de l'Administration. To return to the evening in question. "It's the ghost," little James had cried. An agonizing silence now reigned in the dressing room. Nothing was heard but the hard breathing of the girls. At last, James, flinging herself upon the farthest corner of the wall, with every mark of real terror on her face, whispered, "Listen." Everybody seemed to hear a rustling outside the door. There was no sound of footsteps. It was like light silk sliding over the panel. Then it stopped. Sorelli tried to show more pluck than the others. She went up to the door and, in a quavering voice, said, "Who's there?" But nobody answered. Then, feeling all eyes upon her, watching her last movement, she made an effort to show courage, and said very loudly, "Is there anyone behind the door?" "Oh, yes, yes, of course there is," cried that little dried plum of a Meg Geary, heroically holding Sorelli back by her gauze skirt. "Whatever you do, don't answer the door. Oh, Lord, don't open the door." But Sorelli, armed with the dagger that never left her, turned the key and drew back the door, while the ballet girls retreated to the inner dressing room, and Meg Geary sighed, "Mother, mother!" Sorelli looked into the passage bravely. It was empty. A gas flame, in its glass prison, cast a red and suspicious light into the surrounding darkness, without succeeding in dispelling it. And the dancer slammed the door again with a deep sigh. "No," she said. "There's no one there." "Still, we saw him," James declared, returning with timid little steps to her place beside Sorelli. "He must be somewhere prowling about. I shan't go back to dress. We had better all go down to the foyer together, at once, for the speech, and we will come up again together." And the child reverently touched the little coral finger ring which she wore as a charm against bad luck, while Sorelli, stealthily, with the tip of her pink right thumbnail, made a St. Andrew's cross on the wooden ring which adorned the fourth finger of her left hand. She said to the little ballet girls, "Come, children, pull yourselves together. I dare say no one has ever seen the ghost." "Yes, yes, we saw him. We saw him just now," cried the girls. "He had his death's head and his dress coat just as when he appeared to Joseph Bouquet. And Gabriel saw him too," said James. "Only yesterday afternoon, in broad daylight." "Gabriel? The chorus master?" "Why, yes. Didn't you know?" "And he was wearing his dressing clothes in broad daylight?" "Who? Gabriel?" "What? No, the ghost." "Certainly. Gabriel told me so. That's what he knew him by. Gabriel was in the stage manager's office. Suddenly, the door opened, and the Persian entered. You know the Persian has the evil eye." "Oh, yes," answered the little ballet girls in chorus, warding off ill luck by pointing their forefinger and little finger at the absent Persian, while their second and third fingers were bent on the palm and held down by the thumb. It's a very elaborate description. "And you know how superstitious Gabriel is," answered James. "However, he is always polite. When he meets the Persian, he just puts his hand in his pocket and touches his keys. Well, the moment the Persian appeared in the doorway, Gabriel gave one jump from his chair to the lock of the cupboard so as to touch iron. In doing so, he tore a whole skirt of his overcoat on a nail. Hurrying to get out of the room, he banged his forehead against a hat peg and gave himself a huge bump. Then, suddenly stepping back, he skinned his arm on the screen near the piano. He tried to lean on the piano, but the lid fell on his hands and crushed his fingers. He rushed out of the office like a madman, slipped on the staircase, and came down the whole of the first flight on his back. I was just passing with Mother. We picked him up. He was covered with bruises, and his face was all over blood. We were frightened out of our lives, but all at once he began to thank Providence that he had got off so cheaply. Then he told us what had frightened him. He had seen the ghost behind the Persian, the ghost with the death's head, just like Joseph Bouquet's description. That is quite an ordeal that just happened to him. Sorry, Gabriel. Hmm? James had told her story, ever so quickly, as though the ghost were at her heels, and was quite out of breath at the finish. A silence followed, while Sorelli polished her nails in great excitement. It was broken by little Geary, who said, "Joseph Bouquet would do better to hold his tongue." "Why should he hold his tongue?" asked somebody. "That's Mother's opinion," replied Meg, lowering her voice and looking all about her, as though fearing lest other ears than those present might overhear. "And why is it your mother's opinion?" "Hush! Mother says the ghost doesn't like being talked about." "And why does your mother say so?" Because nothing." This reticence exasperated the curiosity of the young girls, who crowded round little Geary, begging her to explain herself. "Explain yourself." "Shut up, Meg." Exactly. All right. "Why did your mom say so? Why did your mom say so?" Dot, dot, dot. Okay. They were there, side by side, leaning forward simultaneously in one movement of entreaty and fear, communicating their terror to one another, taking a keen pleasure in feeling their blood freeze in their veins. "I swore not to tell," gasped Meg. But they left her no peace, and promised to keep the secret until Meg, burning to say all she knew, began with her eyes fixed on the door. "Well, it's because of the private box." "What private box?" "The ghost's box." "Has the ghost a box?" "Oh, do tell us. Do tell us." "Not so loud," said Meg. "It's box 5, you know, the box on the grand tier, near the stage box on the left." "Nonsense." "I tell you it is. Mother has charge of it. But you swear you won't say a word?" "Of course, of course." "Well, that's the ghost's box. No one has had it for over a month except the ghost, and orders have been given at the box office that it must never be sold." "And does the ghost really come there?" "Yes." "Then somebody does come." What? No! The ghost comes, but there is nobody there." The little ballet girls exchanged glances. If the ghost came to the box, he must be seen, because he wore a dress coat and a death's head. This was what they tried to make Meg understand, but she replied, That's just it. The ghost is not seen, and he has no dress coat and no head. All that talk about his death's head and his head of fire is nonsense. There's nothing in it. You only hear him when he is in the box. Mother has never seen him, but she has heard him. Mother knows because she gives him his program. What? Sorelli interfered. Gertie, child, you're getting at us. Thereupon, Geary, not Gertie. I'm just making up names for poor little Meg. Geary, child, you're getting at us. Thereupon, little Geary began to cry. I ought to have held my tongue, but mother ever came to know. But I was quite right. Joseph Bouquet had no business to talk of things that don't concern him. It will bring him bad luck. Mother was saying so last night. There was a sound of hurried and heavy footsteps in the passage, and a breathless voice called, Cecile! Cecile, are you there? It's mother's voice, said James. What's the matter? She opened the door. A respectable lady, built on the lines of a Pomeranian grenadier, burst into the dressing-room and dropped groaning into a vacant armchair. Her eyes rolled madly in her brick dust-colored face. How awful, she said. How awful. What? What? Joseph Bouquet. What about him? Joseph Bouquet is dead. The room became filled with exclamations, with astonished outcries, with scared requests for explanations. Yes, he was found hanging in the third-floor cellar. It's the ghost, little Geary blurted, as though in spite of herself. But she at once corrected herself, with her hands pressed to her mouth. No, I didn't say it. I didn't say it. All around her, her panic-stricken companions repeated under their breath, Yes, it must be the ghost. Sorelli was very pale. I shall never be able to recite my speech, she said. Ma James gave her opinion, while she emptied a glass of liqueur that happened to be standing on a table. The ghost must have something to do with it. The truth is that no one ever knew about Joseph Bouquet. Nope, the truth is that no one ever knew how Joseph Bouquet met his death. The verdict at the inquest was natural suicide. In his Memoirs of a Manager, M. Moncharmin, one of the joint managers who succeeded Madame Debine and Poligny, describes the incident as follows. A grievous accident spoiled the little party which Madame Debine and Poligny gave to celebrate their retirement. It was in the manager's office when Mercier, the acting manager, suddenly came darting in. He seemed half mad and told me that the body of a scene shifter had been found hanging in the third cellar under the stage, between a farmhouse and a scene from the Rue de Lahore. I shouted, Come and cut him down. By the time I had rushed down the staircase and the Jacob's ladder, the man was no longer hanging from his rope. So this is an event which M. Moncharmin thinks natural. A man hangs at the end of a rope. They go to cut him down. The rope has disappeared. Oh, M. Moncharmin found a very simple explanation. Listen to him. It was just after the ballet, and leaders and dancing girls lost no time in taking their precautions against the evil eye. There you are. Picture the corps de ballet scuttling down the Jacob's ladder and dividing the suicide's rope among themselves in less time than it takes to write. When, on the other hand, I think of the exact spot where the body was discovered, the third cellar underneath the stage, I imagine that somebody must have been interested in seeing that the rope disappeared after it had effected its purpose, and time will show if I am wrong. The horrid news soon spread all over the opera, where Joseph Bouquet was very popular. The dressing-rooms emptied, and the ballet girls, crowding around Sorelli like timid sheep around their shepherdess, made for the foyer through the ill-lit passages and staircases, trotting as fast as their little pink legs could carry them. End of chapter 1. Okay. So, setting the scene, we are backstage of an opera house, and Sorelli is in her dressing room getting ready, reciting a speech that she is going to say at the retirement of the two owners, when all of the little girls in the ballet rush into her room and just start babbling about this ghost. And Sorelli's like, there's absolutely no ghost, even though she fully believes in ghosts. And she's like, where is it? Where's the ghost? And they're like, it's in the hallway. So she like busts down the door. Nothing is there. And so we get these instances where the ghost has appeared before, where other people working on the show have seen the ghost. So somebody saw the ghost in like like really nice dress, like going to attend the opera with Death's head on. Somebody else has seen the ghost as like the fireman saw the ghost, just the head floating towards him, and the head was flaming. Terrifying. And then little Meg Geary is like, excuse me, but my mom says that you can't see the ghost. The ghost has a box and attends the opera, but you can't see him. You can only hear him. And my mom knows that the ghost is there because she gives the ghost the program. Okay, so they're going back and forth, and Meg is like, well, you can't talk about the ghost because then bad things will happen to you, and I shouldn't have said anything, and blah, 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 blah. Um, all very weird. And they talk about Joseph Bouquet, who has talked about the ghost before, and Meg's mom are convinced that something bad is going to happen because he talked about the ghost. And in rushes another James's mom, who James is one of the girls, one of the ballet girls, and in rushes James's mom and says that Joseph Bouquet is dead. He had been found hanging behind the stage in one of the like cellars underneath the stage, and bum bum bum, we have our first murder. And they're like, well, it must be the ghost. Obviously, 'twas the ghost. And then we have writings of... Whose writings are they? Immediately forget the names. Oh. Devine and Poligny. And they describe it as, like, a natural suicide, that there wasn't anything... There was no ghost involved. It was all Joseph himself. And that was chapter 1. Chapter 2. The New Margarita. Would love a new margarita. On the first landing, Sorelli ran against the Comte de Chagny, who was coming upstairs. The Count, who was generally so calm, seemed greatly excited. I was just going to you, he said, taking off his hat. Oh, Sorelli, what an evening! And Christine Daaé, what a triumph! Impossible, said Meg Geary. 6 months ago she used to sing like a crock. But do let us get by, my dear Count, continued the brat, with a saucy curtsy. A saucy curtsy? Oh my. We are going to inquire after our poor man who was found hanging by the neck. Just then the acting manager came fussing past and stopped when he heard this remark. What? He exclaimed roughly. Have you girls heard already? Well, please forget about it for tonight, and above all, don't let M. Devine and M. Poligny hear. It would upset them too much on their last day. They all went on to the foyer of the ballet, which was already full of people. The Comte de Chagny was right. No gala performance ever equaled this one. All the great composers of the day had conducted their own works in turns. Flower and Krauss had sung, and, on that evening, Christine Daaé had revealed her true self for the first time to the astonished and enthusiastic audience. Gounod had conducted the funeral march of a marionette. Reyer, his beautiful overture to Siguar, Saint-Saëns, the Danse Macabre, and the Reverie Orientale. Massenet, an unpublished Hungarian march. Gerard, his Carnaval. Delibes, the Vals Lente from Sylvia, and the Pizzicati from Coppelia. Mademoiselle Krauss had sung the Bolero in the Vespri Siciliani, and Mademoiselle Denise Bloch the drinking song in Lucrezia Borgia. There's a lot of titles. But the real triumph was reserved for Christine Daaé, who had begun by singing a few passages from Romeo and Juliet. It was the first time that the young artist sang in this work of Gounod, which had not been transferred to the opera, and which was revived at the Opéra Comique after it had been produced at the old Theatre Lyrique by Madame Carvalho. Those who heard her say that her voice in these passages was seraphic. But this was nothing to the superhuman notes that she gave forth in the prison scene and the final trio in Faust, which she sang in the place of La Carlotta, who is ill. No one had ever heard or seen anything like it. Day revealed a new Margarita that night, a Margarita of a splendor, a radiance hitherto unsuspected. The whole house went mad, rising to its feet, shouting, cheering, clapping, while Christine sobbed and fainted in the arms of her fellow singers, and had to be carried to her dressing room. A few subscribers, however, protested. Why had so great a treasure been kept from them all that time? Till then, Christine Daaé had played a good Cybele to Carlotta's rather too splendidly material Margarita, and it had needed Carlotta's incomprehensible and inexcusable absence from this gala night for the little Daaé, at a moment's warning, to show all that she could do in a part of the program reserved for the Spanish diva. Well, what the subscribers wanted to know was, why had Debine and Poligny applied to Daaé when Carlotta was taken ill? Did they know of her hidden genius? And if they knew of it, why had they kept it hidden? And why had she kept it hidden? Oddly enough, she was not known to have a professor of singing at that moment. She had often said she meant to practice alone for the future. The whole thing was a mystery. The Comte de Chagny, standing up in his box, listened to all this frenzy and took part in it by loudly applauding. Philippe Georges Marie Comte de Chagny was just 41 years of age. He was a great aristocrat and a good-looking man, above middle height and with attractive features, in spite of his hard forehead and his rather cold eyes. He was exquisitely polite to the women and a little haughty to the men, who did not always forgive him for his successes in society. He had an excellent heart and an irreproachable conscience. On the death of old Count Philibert, he became the head of one of the oldest and most distinguished families in France, whose arms dated back to the 14th century. The Chagnys owned a great deal of property, and, when the old count, who was a widower, died, it was no easy task for Philippe to accept the management of so large an estate. His two sisters and his brother Raoul would not hear of a division and waived their claim to their shares, leaving themselves entirely in Philippe's hands, as though the right of primogeniture had never ceased to exist. When the two sisters married, on the same day, they received their portion from their brother, not as a thing rightfully belonging to them, but as a dowry for which they thanked him. The Comtesse de Chagny de Morgus. Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm extremely butchering this name, and we're just gonna say the Comtesse. It's getting a little silly. The Comtesse had died in giving birth to Raoul, who was born 20 years after his elder brother. At the time of the old Count's death, Raoul was 12 years of age. Philippe busied himself actively with the youngster's education. He was admirably assisted in this work, first by his sisters, and afterward by an old aunt, the widow of a naval officer, who lived at Brest and gave young Raoul a taste for the sea. The lad entered the Borda training ship, finished his course with honors, and quietly made his trip round the world. Thanks to powerful influence, he had just been appointed a member of the official expedition on board the Requin, which was to be sent to the Arctic Circle in search of the survivors of the D'Artois expedition, of whom nothing had been heard of for 3 years. Meanwhile, he was enjoying a long furlough, which would not be over for 6 months, and already the dowagers of the Faubourg Saint-Germain were pitying the handsome and apparently delicate stripling for the hard work in store for him. I should have known that there would be complicated names, at least for me to say, because this book was originally written in French. I should have known. The shyness of the sailor lad, I was almost saying his innocence, was remarkable. He seemed to have but just left the woman's apron strings. As a matter of fact, petted as he was by his 2 sisters and his old aunt, he had retained from this purely feminine education manners that were almost candid and stamped with a charm that nothing had yet been able to sully. He was a little over 21 years of age and looked 18. He had a small, fair mustache, beautiful blue eyes, and a complexion like a girl's. I don't know what that means. Like smooth complexion? Is that what you're saying? Philippe spoiled Raoul. To begin with, he was very proud of him and pleased to foresee a glorious career for his junior in the navy in which one of their ancestors, the famous Chagny de la Roche, had held the rank of admiral. He took advantage of the young man's leave of absence to show him Paris, with all of its luxurious and aristocratic delights. The Count considered that, at Raoul's age, it was not good to be too good. Philippe himself had a character that was well balanced in work and pleasure alike. His demeanor was always faultless, and he was incapable of setting his brother a bad example. He took him with him wherever he went. He even introduced him to the foyer of the ballet. I know that the Count was said to be on terms with Sorelli, but it could hardly be reckoned as a crime for this nobleman, a bachelor, with plenty of leisure, especially since his sisters were settled, to come and spend an hour or two after dinner in the company of a dancer who, though not so very, very witty, had the finest eyes that ever were seen. And besides, there are places where a true Persian, when he has the rank of the Comte de Chagny, is bound to show himself, and at that time the foyer of the ballet at the opera was one of those places. So is he just like hanging out in the foyer and not actually going into the ballet? Is that what's happening? He's just like rubbing elbows with people and like hanging out with Sorelli? I don't know. It seems like all older books have very difficult and silly words and phrases. Lastly, Philippe would perhaps not have taken his brother behind the scenes of the opera if Raoul had not been the first to ask him, repeatedly renewing his request with a gentle obstinacy which the Count remembered at a later date. On that evening, Philippe, after applauding the day, turned to Raoul and saw that he was quite pale. "Don't you see," said Raoul, "that the woman's fainting?" "You look like fainting yourself," said the Count. "What's the matter?" But Raoul had recovered himself and was standing up. "Let's go," he said. "She never sang like that before." The Count gave his brother a curious, smiling glance, and seemed quite pleased. They were soon at the door leading from the house to the stage. Numbers of subscribers were slowly making their way through. Raoul tore his gloves without knowing what he was doing, and Philippe had much too kind a heart to laugh at him for his impatience. But he now understood why Raoul was absent-minded when spoken to, and why he always tried to turn every conversation to the subject of the opera. They reached the stage and pushed through the crowd of gentlemen, scene-shifters, supers, and chorus girls. Raoul, leading the way, feeling that his heart no longer belonged to him, his face set with passion, while Count Philippe followed him with difficulty and continued to smile. At the back of the stage, Raoul had to stop before the inrush of the little troupe of ballet girls, who blocked the passage which he was trying to enter. More than one chaffing phrase darted from little make-up lips, to which he did not reply, and at last he was able to pass and dived into the semi-darkness of a corridor ringing with the name of Daaé. The Count was surprised to find that Raoul knew the way. He had never taken him to Christine himself, and came to the conclusion that Raoul must have gone there alone, while the Count stayed talking in the foyer with Sorelli, who often asked him to wait until it was her time to go on, and sometimes handed him the little gaiters in which she ran down from her dressing-room to preserve the spotlessness of her satin dancing shoes and her flesh-colored tights. Sorelli had an excuse. She had lost her mother. Postponing his usual visit to Sorelli for a few minutes, the Count followed his brother down the passage that led to Daaé's dressing-room, and saw that it had never been so crammed as on that evening, when the whole house seemed excited by her success and also by her fainting fit. For the girl had not yet come to, and the doctor of the theatre had just arrived at the moment when Raoul entered at his heels. Christine, therefore, received the first aid of the one, while opening her eyes in the arms of the other. The Count and many more remained crowding in the doorway. "Don't you think, doctor, that those gentlemen had better clear the room?" asked Raoul coolly. "There's no breathing here." "You're quite right," said the doctor. And he sent every one away, except Raoul and the maid, who looked at Raoul with eyes of the most undisguised astonishment. She had never seen him before, and yet dared not question him, and the doctor imagined that the young man was only acting as he did because he had the right to. The Viscount, therefore, remained in the room watching Christine as she slowly returned to life, while even the joint managers, Devine and Poligny, who had come to offer their sympathy and congratulations, found themselves thrust into the passage among the crowd of dandies. The Comte de Chagny, who was one of those standing outside, laughed. "Oh, the rogue, the rogue!" and he added under his breath, "Those youngsters with their schoolgirl airs. So he's a Chagny after all." He turned to go to Sorelli's dressing-room, but met her on the way with her little troupe of trembling ballet girls, as we have seen. Meanwhile, Christine Daaé uttered a deep sigh, which was answered by a groan. She turned her head, saw Raoul, and started. She looked at the doctor, on whom she bestowed a smile, then at her maid, then at Raoul again. "Monsieur," she said in a voice not much above a whisper, "who are you?" "Mademoiselle," replied the young man, kneeling on one knee and pressing a fervent kiss on the diva's hand, "I am the little boy who went into the sea to rescue your scarf." That's a little forward. Christine again looked at the doctor and the maid, and all three began to laugh. Raoul turned very red and stood up. "Mademoiselle," he said, "since you are pleased not to recognize me, I should like to say something to you in private. Something very important." "When I am better, do you mind?" And her voice shook. You have been very good. Yes, you must go, said the doctor, with his pleasant smile. Leave me to attend to mademoiselle. I am not ill now, said Christine suddenly, with strange and unexpected energy. She rose and passed her hand over her eyelids. Thank you, doctor. I should like to be alone. Please go away, all of you. Please leave me. I feel very restless this evening. The doctor tried to make a short protest, but perceiving the girl's evident agitation, he thought the best remedy was not to thwart her, and he went away, saying to Raoul outside, She is not herself tonight. She is usually so gentle. I don't think she was being ungentle. She just asked to be alone and didn't remember Raoul. Usually she is much more gentle. Then he said good night, and Raoul was left alone. The whole of this part of the theater was now deserted. The farewell ceremony was no doubt taking place in the foyer of the ballet. Raoul thought the day might go to it, and he waited in the silent solitude, even hiding in the favoring shadow of a doorway. He felt a terrible pain at his heart, and it was out of this that he wanted to speak to Daaé without delay. Suddenly the dressing-room door opened, and the maid came out by herself, carrying bundles. He stopped her and asked how her mistress was. The woman laughed and said that she was quite well, but that he must not disturb her, for she wished to be left alone. And she passed on. One idea alone filled Raoul's burning brain. Of course Daaé wished to be left alone from him. Had he not told her that he wanted to speak to her privately? Hardly breathing, he went up to the dressing-room and, with his ear to the door to catch her reply, prepared to knock. But his hand dropped. He had heard a man's voice in the dressing-room, saying in a curiously masterful tone, "Christine, you must love me." And Christine's voice, infinitely sad and trembling, as though accompanied by tears, replied, "How can you talk like that, when I sing only for you?" Raoul leaned against the panel to ease his pain. His heart, which had seemed gone forever, returned to his breast and was throbbing loudly. The whole passage echoed with its beating, and Raoul's ears were deafened. Surely, if his heart continued to make such a noise, they would hear it inside. They would open the door, and the young man would be turned away in disgrace. What a position for Shackney, to be caught listening behind a door. He took his heart in his two hands to make it stop. The man's voice spoke again. "Are you tired?" "Oh, tonight I gave you my soul, and I am dead," Christine replied. "Your soul is a beautiful thing, child," replied the grave man's voice, "and I thank you. No emperor ever received so fair a gift. The angels wept tonight." Raoul heard nothing after that. Nevertheless, he did not go away, but, as though he feared lest he should be caught, he returned to his dark corner, determined to wait for the man to leave the room. At one and the same time, he had learned what love meant and hatred. He knew that he loved. He wanted to know whom he hated. To his great astonishment, the door opened and Christine Daaé appeared, wrapped in furs, with her face hidden in a lace veil alone. She closed the door behind her, but Raoul observed that she did not lock it. She passed him. He did not even follow her with his eyes, for his eyes were fixed on the door, which did not open again. When the passage was once more deserted, he crossed it, opened the door of the dressing-room, went in and shut the door. He found himself in absolute darkness. The gas had been turned out. "There is someone here," said Raoul, with his back against the closed door, in a quivering voice. "What are you hiding for?" All was darkness and silence. Raoul heard only the sound of his own breathing. He quite failed to see that the indiscretion of his conduct was exceeding all bounds. "You shan't leave this until I let you," he exclaimed. "If you don't answer, you are a coward, but I'll expose you." And he struck a match. The blaze lit up the room. There was no one in the room. Raoul, first turning the key in the door, lit the gas jets. He went into the dressing closet, opened the cupboards, hunted about, felt the walls with his moist hands. Why was that a description that needed to be there? Nothing. Look here, he said aloud. Am I going mad? He stood for 10 minutes listening to the gas flaring in the silence of the empty room. Lover though he was, he did not even think of stealing a ribbon that would have given him the perfume of the woman he loved. Good. I'm glad you didn't even think about stealing a ribbon to smell somebody. Raoul, calm yourself. You and your moist hands need to calm down. He went out, not knowing what he was doing, nor where he was going. At a given moment in his wayward progress, an icy draught struck him in the face. He found himself at the bottom of a staircase, down which, behind him, a procession of workmen were carrying a sort of stretcher covered with a white sheet. "Which is the way out, please?" he asked one of the men. "Straight in front of you. The door is open, but let us pass." Pointing to the stretcher, he asked mechanically, "What's that?" The workman answered, "That is Joseph Bouquet, who was found in the third cellar, hanging between a farmhouse and a scene from the Roi de Lahore." He took off his hat, fell back to make room for the procession, and went out. End of chapter 2. Okay, so end of chapter 2. What has happened? We are introduced to brothers, Raoul and oh crap, what's his name? Oh my god. The mind of a goldfish. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what his name is. Can I find it if I'm just flipping through real quick? No. Okay. It's fine. Raoul and his brother. And Raoul is, the kind of guy who hangs out and enjoys the company of ballerinas and enjoys the company of other aristocrats who enjoy the ballet. So they see the goodbye performance to the owners of the opera, and Raoul and his brother are like, okay, so this Christine girl, amazing. And Raoul is like, well, I know who that is, and she's wonderful, and I love her. Let's go see her. So they go backstage, and and while performing, Christine has fainted. So I feel like that's a detail that I should say. And so they go backstage, and they go to Christine's dressing room, and the doctor is there, and like an assistant of some sort is also there. I don't remember what her title is, but she's there too. And Christine slowly comes to, and Raoul gets on his knee and kisses her hand and then quotes something, and Christine is like, "What?" And Raoul is like, "Of course you remember me, for I am Raoul, your love." And Christine is like, can I just be by myself?" And Raoul was like, "Yes, you and I need to discuss in private." And Christine is like, no, 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 I want to be by myself. I don't need the doctor here now. I don't need you here, whoever you are. I just want to be by myself. So everybody leaves the room, and Philippe, yes, Philippe is the brother. Thank you so much. Raoul hears somebody, and so he is a creeper and puts his ear against the door and is listening to this conversation, and it is another a man's voice is speaking and is like, "But Christine, do you love me?" And Christine is like, "Of course I do. I only sing for you. Duh, this is how I express my love." And they go back and forth a little bit, and then Christine leaves. Raoul is trying to act casual in the hallway, I guess. And Christine just goes, leaves and closes the door to her dressing room, but doesn't lock it. And Raoul is like, "Now is my chance. I'm going to see whom I hate, because I love Christine, and Christine is my girl." And so he busts into the room. The room is dark, and he's like, "All right, you fool. I know you're in here. Show yourself." And nobody's there. And he's looking in the closet and stuff to see if somebody's hiding. He lights the light. Nobody is there. He there's a description of him using his moist hands to touch the walls to see if there's a hiding place or something. Absolutely nobody is there. And he's like, "What?" And so he steps out of the dressing room, and he's on his way out, and two men holding a stretcher with like a blanket over a body are taking out our friend Joseph, and Raoul walks into them and is like, which way is the way out? And they're like, oh, it's that way. And he's like, what is that? And they're like, well, that is the body of Joseph Bouquet. And so then Raoul just like leaves. He's like, all right, whatever. And then leaves. And that's where we are. Totally remembered all on your own. And so begins the cycle. Okay. Chapter 3. The mysterious reason. During this time, the farewell ceremony was taking place. I have already said that this magnificent function was being given on the occasion of the retirement of M. Debine and M. Poligny, who had determined to die game, D-I-E, game, as we say nowadays. As we say nowadays, in modern times. They had been assisted in the realization of their ideal through melancholy, program by all that counted on the social and artistic world of Paris. All these people met after the performance in the foyer of the ballet, where Sorelli waited for the arrival of the retiring managers with a glass of champagne in her hand and a little prepared speech at the tip of her tongue. Behind her, the members of the corps de ballet, young and old, discussed the events of the day in whispers, or exchanged discreet signals with their friends. A noisy crowd of whom surrounded the supper tables, arranged among the slanting floor. A few of the dancers had already changed into ordinary dress, but most of them wore their skirts of gossamer gauze, and all that thought it the right thing to put on a special face for the occasion. All, that is, except for James, whose 15 summers, happy age, seemed already to have forgotten the ghost and the death of Joseph Bouquet. She never ceased to laugh and chatter, to hop about and play practical jokes until... Okay, earlier I said madam. That's and I know this. But MM is monsieur's, and as in like more than one dude. And I know that I said it wrong earlier, and I apologize. I will say it correctly from now on. And maybe I'll stop just saying M name and just say Monsieur. Maybe. We might get wild and crazy over here, and nobody knows. Any hoodle. She never ceased to laugh and chatter, to hop about and play practical jokes until Monsieurs Debine and Poligny appeared on the steps of the foyer, when she was severely called to order by the impatient Sorelli. Everybody noted that the retiring managers looked cheerful, as is the Paris way. None will ever be a true Parisian who has not learned to wear a mask of gaiety over his sorrows and one of sadness, boredom, or indifference over his inward joy. You know that one of your friends is in trouble. Do not try to console him. He will tell you that he is already comforted. But, should he have met with good fortune, be careful how you congratulate him. He thinks it so natural that he is surprised that you should speak of it. In Paris, our lives are one masked ball, and the foyer of the ballet is the last place in which two men, so knowing as Monsieur Debine and Monsieur Poligny, would have made the mistake of betraying their grief, however genuine it might be. And they were already smiling rather too broadly upon Sorelli, who had begun to recite her speech, when an exclamation from that little madcap of a James broke the smile of the managers so brutally that the expression of distress and dismay that lay beneath it became apparent to all. "The opera ghost!" James yelled those words in a tone of unspeakable terror, and her finger pointed, among the crowd of dandies, to a face so pallid, so lugubrious and so ugly, with two such deep black cavities under the straddling eyebrows that the death's hand in question immediately scored a huge success. The opera ghost! The opera ghost! Everybody laughed and pushed his neighbor and wanted to offer the opera ghost a drink, but he was gone. He had slipped through the crowd, and the others vainly hunted for him, while two old gentlemen tried to calm little James, and while little Geary stood screaming like a peacock. Sorelli was furious. She had not been able to finish her speech. The managers had kissed her, thanked her, and run away as fast as the ghost himself. No one was surprised at this, for it was known that they were to go through the same ceremony on the floor above in the foyer of the singers, and that finally they were themselves to receive their personal friends for the last time in the great lobby outside the manager's office, where a regular supper would be served. Here they found the new managers, Monsieur Armand Moncharmin and Monsieur Firmin Richard, who they hardly knew. Nevertheless, they were lavish in protestations of friendship, and received 1,000 flattering compliments in reply, so that those of the guests who had feared that they had a rather tedious evening in store for them at once put on brighter faces. The supper was almost happy, and a particularly clever speech of the representative of the government, mingling the glories of the past with the successes of the future, caused the greatest cordiality to prevail. The retiring managers had already handed over to the successors the two tiny master keys, which opened all the doors, thousands of doors, of the opera house. And those little keys, the object of general curiosity, were being passed from hand to hand when the attention of some of the guests was diverted by their discovery at the end of the table of that strange, wan, and fantastic face with the hollow eyes, which had already appeared in the foyer of the ballet, and been greeted by little James's exclamation, "The opera ghost!" There sat the ghost, as natural as could be, except that he neither ate nor drank. Those who began by looking at him with a smile ended by turning away their heads, for the sight of him at once provoked the most funereal thoughts. No one repeated the joke of the foyer. No one exclaimed, "There's the opera ghost." He himself did not speak a word, and his very neighbors could not have stated at what precise moment he had sat down between them. But every one felt that if the dead did ever come and sit at the table of the living, they could not cut a more ghastly figure. The friends of Firmin Richard and Armand Moncharmin thought that this lean and skinny guest was an acquaintance of Devine's or Poligny's, while Devine's and Poligny's friends believed that the cadaverous individual belonged to Firmin Richard and Armand Moncharmin's party. The result was that no request was made for an explanation, no unpleasant remark, no joke in bad taste, which might have offended this visitor from the tomb. A few of those present who knew the story of the ghost and the description of him given by the chief scene shifter, they did not know of Joseph Bouquet's death, thought, in their own minds, that the man at the end of the table might easily have passed for him, and yet, according to the story, the ghost had no nose, and the person in question had. But Monsieur Moncharmin declares, in his memoirs, that the guest's nose was transparent. Long, thin, and transparent are his exact words. I, for my part, will add that this might very well apply to a false nose. Monsieur Moncharmin may have taken for transparency what was only shininess. Everybody knows that orthopedic science provides beautiful false noses for those who have lost their noses naturally or as the result of an operation. Did the ghost really take a seat at the manager's supper table that night, uninvited? And can we be sure that the figure was that of the opera ghost himself? Who would venture to assert as much? I mention the incident not because I wish for a second to make the reader believe, or even try to make him believe, that the ghost was capable of such a sublime piece of impudence, but because, after all, the thing is impossible. Monsieur Armand Moncharmin, in chapter 11 of his memoirs, says, "When I think of this first evening, I cannot separate the secret confided to us by Messieurs Debine and Poligny in their office from the presence at our supper of that ghostly person whom none of us knew." What happened was this. Messieurs Debine and Poligny, sitting at the center of the table, had not seen the man with the death's head. Suddenly, he began to speak. "The ballet girls are right," he said. "The death of that poor Bouquet is perhaps not so natural as people think." Debine and Poligny gave a start. "Is Bouquet dead?" they cried. "Yes," replied the man, or the shadow of a man, quietly. "He was found, this evening, hanging in the third cellar, between a farmhouse and a scene from the Roi de Lahore." The two managers, or rather ex-managers, at once rose and stared strangely at the speaker. They were more excited than they need have been, that is to say, more excited than anyone need be by the announcement of the suicide of a chief scene-shifter. They looked at each other. They had both turned whiter than the tablecloth. At last, Debine made a sign to Messieurs Richard and Moncharmin. Poligny muttered a few words of excuse to the guests, and all four went into the manager's office. I leave Monsieur Moncharmin to complete the story. In his memoirs, he says, "Messieurs Debine and Poligny seemed to grow more and more excited, and they appeared to have something very difficult to tell us. First, they asked us if we knew the man, sitting at the end of the table, who had told them of the death of Joseph Bouquet, and, when we answered in the negative, they looked still more concerned. They took the master keys from our hands, stared at them for a moment, and advised us to have new locks made, with the greatest secrecy, for the rooms, closets, and presses that we might wish to have hermetically closed. They said this so funnily that we began to laugh, and to ask if there were thieves at the opera. They replied that there was something worse, which was the ghost. We began to laugh again, feeling sure that they were indulging in some joke that was intended to crown our little entertainment. Then, at their request, we became serious, resolving to humor them and to enter into the spirit of the game. They told us that they never would have spoken to us of the ghost if they had not received formal orders from the ghost himself to ask us to be pleasant to him, and to grant any request that he might make. However, in their relief at leaving a domain where that tyrannical shade held sway, they had hesitated until the last moment to tell us this curious story, which our skeptical minds were certainly not prepared to entertain. But the announcement of the death of Joseph Bouquet had served them as a brutal reminder that, whenever they had disregarded the ghost's wishes, some fantastic or disastrous event had brought them to a sense of their dependence. During these unexpected utterances, made in a tone of the most secret and important confidence, I looked at Richard. Richard, in his student days, had acquired a great reputation for practical joking, and he seemed to relish the dish which was being served up to him in his turn. He did not miss a morsel of it, though the seasoning was a little gruesome because of the death of Bouquet. He nodded his head sadly, while the others spoke, and his features assumed the air of a man who bitterly regretted having taken over the opera, now that he knew that there was a ghost mixed up in the business. I could think of nothing better than to give him a servile imitation of this attitude of despair. However, in spite of all our efforts, we could not, at the finish, help bursting out laughing in the faces of Messieurs Debine and Poligny, who, seeing us pass straight from the gloomiest state of mind to one of the most insolent merriment, acted as though they thought that we had gone mad. Thank you. Totally not being a smartass. No, thank you so much. Monsieur. Okay. You do not say the N like a commoner. Got it. Thank you so much. No. I super appreciate that because I'm sure that I'm going to be saying that a million more times. So thank you. The joke became a little tedious, and Richard asked half seriously and half in jest, "But after all, what does this ghost of yours want?" Monsieur, there we go. Poligny went to his desk and returned with a copy of the memorandum book. The memorandum book begins with the well-known words saying that the management of the opera shall give to the performance of the National Academy of Music the splendor that becomes the first lyric stage in France, and ends with Clause 98, which says that the privilege can be withdrawn if the manager infringes the conditions stipulated in the memorandum books. This is followed by the conditions, which are 4 in number. The copy produced by Monsieur Poligny was written in black ink, and exactly similar to that in our possession, except that, at the end, it contained a paragraph in red ink and in an odd, labored handwriting, as though it had been produced by dipping the heads of matches into the ink, the writing of a child that has never got beyond the downstrokes and has not learned to join its letters. This paragraph ran, word for word, as follows. 5. Or if the manager, in any month, delay for more than a fortnight the payment of the allowance which he shall make to the opera ghost, an allowance of 20,000 francs a month, say 240,000 francs a year. Monsieur Poligny pointed with a hesitating finger to his last clause, which we certainly did not expect. Is that all? Does he not want anything else? Asked Richard with the greatest coolness. Yes, he does, replied Poligny. And he turned over the pages of the memorandum book until he came to the clause specifying the days on which certain private boxes were to be reserved for the free use of the President of the Republic and ministers, and so on. At the end of this clause, a line had been added, also in red ink. Box 5 on the grand tier shall be placed at the disposal of the opera ghost for every performance. When we saw this, there was nothing else for us to do but to rise from our chairs, shake our 2 predecessors warmly by the hand, and congratulate them on thinking of this charming little joke, which proved that the old French sense of humor was never likely to become extinct. Richard added that he now understood why Messieurs Debine and Poligny were retiring from the management of the National Academy of Music. Business was impossible with so unreasonable a ghost. Certainly 240,000 francs was not to be picked up for the asking, said Monsieur Poligny, without moving a muscle on his face. Have you considered what the loss over box 5 meant to us? We did not sell it once, and not only that, but we had to return the subscription. Why, it's awful. We really can't work to keep ghosts. We prefer to go away. Yes, echoed Monsieur Debine. We prefer to go away. Let us go. And he stood up. Richard said, But, after all, it seems to me that you were much too kind to the ghost. If I had such a troublesome ghost as that, I should not hesitate to have him arrested. But how? Where? They cried in chorus. We have never seen him. But when he comes to his box, we have never seen him in his box. Then sell it. Sell the opera ghost's box? Well, gentlemen, try it. Thereupon we all 4 left the office. Richard and I had never laughed so much in our lives. End of chapter 4. End of chapter 3. Okay, so we are at the farewell to our managers, Poligny and Devine, and they do, like, the ghost is there. So saith young little dancer James. And it turns out that nobody really knows who this person is. So it very well could be the ghost. But our old managers thought that it was from the new manager party, and the new managers thought it was from the old managers party. So nobody like questioned anything. Nobody was super rude to him or like anything like that. They just thought it was another guest at the party. And so the old managers leaving, Poligny and Devine learn of the death of Joseph Bouquet, and they're like, uh-oh. And so they pull the new or the to-be managers aside into the office, and they show the manuscript. And written on there is new rules, and it looks like it's like in red ink and written by a different hand than the rest of the memorandum. And included in that is that box 5 of the opera house must never be sold. It is reserved to the ghost. There's, however many tickets in that box, and they have to go to the ghost. Nobody else, you can't sell it. And the other is that money needs to be left for this ghost, like however much money in the year. And the managers are like, all right, well, then you know what the ghost looks like. And they're like, no, we don't. And they're like, but you sell you leave the box for the ghost. And they're like, yeah, but you've never seen the ghost. And they're like, okay, well, then just sell it. And they're like, oh, okay, you go ahead and try that, bub. Try and sell the box. See what happens. And that's where we are. Interesting. Interesting. Chapter 4. Box 5. I'm gonna have a little sip first. Box 5. Armand Moncharmin wrote such voluminous memoirs during the fairly long period of his co-management that we may well ask if he ever found time to attend to the affairs of the opera, otherwise than by telling what went on there. Monsieur Moncharmin did not know a note of music, but he called the Minister of Education and Fine Arts by his Christian name, and dabbled a little in society journalism, and enjoyed a considerable private income. Lastly, he was a charming fellow, and showed that he was not lacking in intelligence, for, as soon as he made up his mind to be a sleeping partner in the opera, he selected the best possible active manager, and went straight to Firmin Richard. Firmin Richard. Firmin Richard was a very distinguished composer, who had published a number of successful pieces of all kinds, and who liked nearly every form of music and every sort of musician. Clearly, therefore, it was the duty of every sort of musician to like Monsieur Firmin Richard. The only things to be said against him were that he was rather masterful in his ways, and endowed with a very hasty temper. The first few days which the partners spent at the opera were given over to the delight of finding themselves the head of so magnificent an enterprise, and they had forgotten all about that curious, fantastic story of the ghost, when an incident occurred that proved to them that the joke, if joke it were, was not over. Monsieur Firmin Richard reached his office that morning at 11 o'clock. His secretary, Monsieur Remy, showed him half a dozen letters which he had not opened because they were marked private. One of the letters had at once attracted Richard's attention, not only because of the envelope was addressed in red ink, but because he seemed to have seen the writing before. He soon remembered that it was the red handwriting in which the memorandum book had been so curiously completed. He recognized the clumsy, childish hand. He opened the letter and read, "Dear Mr. Manager, I am sorry to have to trouble you at a time when you must be so very busy, renewing important engagements, signing fresh ones, and generally displaying your excellent taste. I know what you have done for Carlotta, Sorelli, and little James, and for a few others whose admirable qualities of talent or genius you have suspected. Of course, when I use these words, I do not mean to apply them to La Carlotta, who sings like a squirt, and who ought never to have been allowed to leave the ambassadors of the Café Jacquin, nor to La Sorelli, who owes her success mainly to the coach builders, nor to little James, who dances like a calf in a field, and I am not speaking of Christine Daaé either, though her genius is certain, whereas your jealousy prevents her from creating any important part. When all is said, you are free to conduct your little business as you think best, are you not? All the same, I should like to take advantage of the fact that you have not yet turned Christine Daaé out of doors by hearing her this evening in the part of Cybele, as that of Margarita has been forbidden her since her triumph of the other evening, and I will ask you not to dispose of my box today, nor on the following days, for I cannot end this letter without telling you how disagreeably surprised I have been once or twice to hear, on arriving at the opera, that my box had been sold, at the box office, by your orders. I did not protest, first, because I dislike scandal, and second, because I thought that your predecessors, Messieurs Devine and Poligny, who were always charming to me, had neglected, before leaving, to mention my little fads to you. I have now received a reply from those gentlemen to my letter, asking for an explanation, and this reply proves that you know all about my memorandum book, and, consequently, that you are treating me with outrageous contempt. If you wish to live in peace, you must not begin by taking away my private box. Believe me to be dear Mr. Manager, without prejudice to these little observations, your most humble and obedient servant, Opera Ghost. I love that he signed it, Opera Ghost. The letter was accompanied by a cutting from the agony column of the Revue Theatrale, which ran, "O.G. There is no excuse for R and M. We told them and left your memorandum book in their hands. Kind regards." Monsieur Firmin Richard had hardly finished reading this letter when Armand Moncharmin entered, carrying one exactly similar. They looked at each other and burst out laughing. "They are keeping up the joke," said Monsieur Richard, "but I don't call it funny." "What does it all mean?" asked Monsieur Moncharmin. Do they imagine that, because they have been managers of the opera, we are going to let them have a box for an indefinite period? "I am not in the mood to let myself be laughed at long," said Firmin Richard. "It's harmless enough," observed Armand Moncharmin. "What is it they really want? A box for tonight?" Monsieur Firmin Richard told his secretary to send box 5 on the grand tier to Messieurs Devine and Poligny if it was not sold. It was not. It was sent off to them. Devine lived at the corner of the Rue Scribe and Boulevard des Capucines, Poligny in the Rue Auber. Ghost's 2 letters had been posted at the Boulevard des Capucines post office, as Moncharmin remarked after examining the envelopes. "You see," said Richard. They shrugged their shoulders and regretted that 2 men of that age should amuse themselves with such childish tricks. "They might have been civil for all that," said Moncharmin. "Did you notice how they treat us with regard to Carlotta, Sorelli, and little James?" Why, my dear fellow, these two are mad with jealousy. To think that they went to the expense of an advertisement in the Revue Theatrale. They have nothing better to do. By the way, said Moncharmin, they seem to be greatly interested in that little Christine Daaé. You know as well as I do that she has the reputation of being quite good, said Richard. Reputations are easily obtained, replied Moncharmin. Haven't I a reputation for knowing all about music? And I don't know one key from another. Don't be afraid. You never had that reputation, Richard declared. Thereupon he ordered the artists to be shown in, who, for the last 2 hours, had been walking up and down outside the door behind which fame and fortune, or dismissal, awaited them. The whole day was spent in discussing, negotiating, signing, or cancelling contracts, and the two overworked managers went to bed early, without so much as casting a glance at Box 5 to see whether Monsieur Debine and Monsieur Poligny were enjoying the performance. Next morning the managers received a card of thanks from the ghost. Dear Mr. Manager, thanks. Charming evening. Day exquisite. Choruses want waking up. Carlotta, a splendid commonplace instrument. Will write you soon for the 240,000 francs, or 233,424 francs, 70. To be correct. Messieurs Debine and Poligny have sent me the 6,575 francs, 30 cents, representing the first 10 days of my allowance for the current year. Their privileges finished on the evenings of the 10th inst. Kind regards, O.G. On the other hand, there was a letter from Messieurs Debine and Poligny. Gentlemen, we are much obliged for your kind thought of us, but you will easily understand that the prospect of again hearing Faust, pleasant though it is to ex-managers of the opera, cannot make us forget that we have no right to occupy Box 5 on the grand tier, which is the exclusive property of him of whom we spoke to you when we went through the memorandum book with you for the last time. See clause 98, final paragraph. Accept, gentlemen, etc. Ugh, those fellows are beginning to annoy me, shouted Fearman Richard, snatching up the letter. And that evening Box 5 was sold. The next morning, Messieurs Richard and Moncharmin, on reaching their office, found an inspector's report relating to an incident that had happened the night before in Box 5. I give the essential part of the report. I was obliged to call in a municipal guard twice this evening to clear Box 5 on the grand tier, once at the beginning and once in the middle of the second act. The occupants who arrived as the curtain rose on the second act created a regular scandal by their laughter and their ridiculous observations. There were cries of "Hush!" all around them, and the whole house was beginning to protest, when the box-keeper came to fetch me. I entered the box and said what I thought necessary. The people did not seem to me to be in their right mind, and they made stupid remarks. I said that, if the noise was repeated, I should be compelled to clear the box. The moment I left, I heard the laughing again, with fresh protests from the house. I returned with a municipal guard, who turned them out. They protested, still laughing, saying they would not go unless they had their money back. At last they became quiet, and I allowed them to enter the box again. The laughter at once recommenced, and this time I had them turned out definitely. Send for the inspector, said Richard to his secretary, who had already read the report and marked it with blue pencil. Monsieur Remy, the secretary, had foreseen the order and called the inspector at once. Tell us what happened, said Richard bluntly. The inspector began to splutter and referred to the report. Well, but what were those people laughing at? Asked Moncharmin. They must have been dining, sir, and seemed more inclined to lark about than to listen to good music. The moment they entered the box, they came out again and called the box-keeper, who asked them what they wanted. They said, "Look in the box. There's no one there, is there?" "No," said the woman. "Well?" they said. When we went in, we heard a voice saying that the box was taken. Monsieur Moncharmin could not help smiling, and he looked at Monsieur Richard. But Monsieur Richard did not smile. He himself had done too much in that way in his time not to recognize in the inspector's story all the marks of one of those practical jokes which begin by amusing and end by enraging the victims. The inspector, to curry favor with Monsieur Moncharmin, who was smiling, thought it best to give a smile too. A most unfortunate smile. Monsieur Richard glared at his subordinate, who thenceforth made it his business to display a face of utter consternation. However, when the people arrived, roared Richard, there was no one in the box, was there? Not a soul, sir, not a soul. Nor in the box on the right, nor in the box on the left. Not a soul, I swear. The box-keeper told it me often enough, which proves that it was all a joke. Oh, you agree, do you? Said Richard. You agree it's a joke, and you think it funny, no doubt. I think it in very bad taste, sir. And what did the box-keeper say? Oh, she said that it was the opera ghost. That's all she said. And the inspector grinned. But he soon found that he had made a mistake in grinning, for the words had no sooner left his mouth than Monsieur Richard, from gloomy, became furious. Send for the box-keeper, he shouted. Send for her this minute, and bring her in to me here, and turn all those people out. The inspector tried to protest, but Richard closed his mouth with an angry order to hold his tongue. Then, when the wretched man's lips seemed shut forever, the manager commanded him to open them once more. Who is this opera ghost? He snarled. But the inspector was by this time incapable of speaking a word. He managed to convey, by a despairing gesture, that he knew nothing about it, or rather that he did not wish to know. Have you ever seen him? Have you seen the opera ghost? The inspector, by means of a vigorous shake of the head, denied ever having seen the ghost in question. Very well, said Monsieur Richard coldly. The inspector's eyes started out of his head, as though to ask why the manager had uttered that ominous very well. Because I am going to settle the account of anyone who has not seen him, explained the manager, as he seems to be everywhere. I can't have people telling me that they see him nowhere. I like people to work for me when I employ them. Having said this, Monsieur Richard paid no attention to the inspector, and discussed various matters of business with his acting manager, who had entered the room meanwhile. The inspector thought he could go, and was gently, oh, so gently, sidling toward the door, when Monsieur Richard nailed the man to the floor with a thundering, "Stay where you are!" Monsieur Remy had sent for the box manager to the Rue de Provence, close to the opera, where she was engaged in a portress. She soon made her appearance. What is your name? Madame Giry. You know me well enough, sir. I am the mother of little Giry, little Meg. This was said in so rough and solemn a tone that, for a moment, Monsieur Richard was impressed. He looked at Madame Giry, in her faded shawl, her worn shoes, her old taffeta dress and dingy bonnet. It was quite evident from the manager's attitude that he either did not know or could not remember having met Madame Giry, nor even little Giry, nor even little Meg. But Madame Giry's pride was so great that the celebrated box-keeper imagined that everybody knew her. Never heard of her, the manager declared. But that's no reason, Madame Giry, why I shouldn't ask you what happened last night to make you and the inspector call in a municipal guard. Oh, I was just wanting to see you, sir, and talk to you about it, so that you mightn't have the same unpleasantness as Monsieur Debine and Monsieur Poligny. They wouldn't listen to me either, at first. I'm not asking you about all that. I'm asking what happened last night. Madame Giry turned purple with indignation. Never had she been spoken to like that. She rose as though to go, gathering up the folds of her skirt, and waving the feathers of her dingy bonnet with dignity. But, changing her mind, she sat down again and said, in a haughty voice, "I'll tell you what happened. The ghost was annoyed again." Thereupon, as Monsieur Richard was on the point of bursting out, Monsieur Moncharmin interfered and conducted the interrogation, whence it appeared that Madame Giry thought it quite natural that a voice should be heard to say that a box was taken, when there was nobody in the box. She was unable to explain this phenomenon, which was not new to her, except by the intervention of the ghost. Nobody could see the ghost in his box, but everybody could hear him. She had often heard him, and they could believe her, for she always spoke the truth. They could ask Monsieur Debine and Monsieur Peligny, and anybody who knew her, and also Monsieur Isidore Sac, who had had a leg broken by the ghost. "Indeed," said Moncharmin, interrupting her. "Did the ghost break poor Isidore Sac's leg?" Madame Giry opened her eyes with astonishment at such ignorance. However, she consented to enlighten those poor innocents. The thing had happened in Monsieur Debine's and Monsieur Peligny's time, also in Box 5, and also during a performance of Faust. Madame Giry coughed, cleared her throat. It sounded as though she were preparing to sing the whole of Gounod's score, and began. "It was like this, sir. That night, Monsieur Menier and his lady, the jewelers in Rue Mogador, were sitting in the front of the box, with their great friend, Monsieur Isidore Sac, sitting behind Madame Maniera. Madame Giry here burst into song herself. I will not be bursting into song, Caterina, while you play at sleeping. And then, Monsieur Maniera heard a voice in his right ear. His wife was on his left, saying, "Ha ha, Julie's not playing at sleeping." His wife happened to be called Julie. So, Monsieur Manier turned to the right to see who was talking to him like that. Nobody there. He rubbed his ears and asked himself if he was dreaming. Then the show went on with his serenade. But perhaps I'm boring you, gentlemen. No, go on. You are too good, gentlemen, with a smirk. Well, then. Mephistopheles continued on with his serenade. Madame Giry burst into song again, which again I will not be doing. Saint unclose thy portals holy, and accord the bliss to a mortal bending lowly of a pardon kiss. And then Monsieur Menier again hears the voice in his right ear, saying, this time, ha ha, Julie wouldn't mind according a kiss to Isidore. Then he turns round again, but this time to the left, and what do you think he sees? Isidore, who had taken his lady's hand and was covering it with kisses through the little round place in the glove, like this, gentlemen, rapturously kissing the bit of palm left bare in the middle of her thread gloves. Then they had a lively time between them. Bang, bang. Monsieur Manier was big and strong like you, Monsieur Richard, gave 2 blows to Isidore Sac, who was small and weak like Monsieur Moncharmin, saving his presence. There was a great uproar. People in the house shouted, "That will do, stop them, he'll kill him." Then, at last, Monsieur Isidore Sac managed to run away. "Then the ghost had not broken his leg?" asked Monsieur Charmin, a little vexed that his figure had made so little impression on Madame Giry. "He did not break it for him, sir," replied Madame Giry haughtily. "He broke it for him on the grand staircase, which he ran down too fast, sir, and it will be long before the poor gentleman will be able to go up it again." "Did the ghost tell you what he said in Monsieur Manier's right ear?" asked Monsieur Moncharmin, with a gravity which he thought exceedingly humorous. "No, sir. It was Monsieur Manière himself, who... So, but you have spoken to the ghost, my good lady. As I'm speaking to you now, my good sir, said Madame Giry. And then the ghost speaks to you. What does he say? Well, he tells me to bring him a footstool. This time, Richard burst out laughing, as did Moncharmin and Remy, the secretary. Only the inspector, warned by experience, was careful not to laugh, while Madame Giry ventured to adopt an attitude that was positively threatening. Instead of laughing, she cried indignantly, you'd do better to do as Monsieur Poligny did, who found out for himself. Found out about what? Asked Moncharmin, who had never been so much amused in his life. About the ghost, of course. Look here. She suddenly calmed herself, feeling that this was a solemn moment in her life. Look here, she repeated. They were playing La Juvie. Monsieur Poligny thought he would watch the performance from the ghost's box. Well, when Leopold cried, "Let us fly," you know, and Eleazar stops him and says, "Whither go ye?" Well, Monsieur Poligny, I was watching him from the back of the next box, which was empty. Monsieur Poligny got up and walked out quite stiffly, like a statue, and before I had time to ask him, "Whither go ye?" like Eleazar was down in the staircase, but without breaking his leg. Still, that doesn't let us know how the opera ghost came to ask you for a footstool, insisted Monsieur Moncharmin. Well, from that evening no one tried to take the ghost's private box from him. The manager gave orders that he was to have it at each performance, and whenever he came, he asked me for a footstool. Tut, tut, a ghost asking for a footstool. Then this ghost of yours is a woman? No, the ghost is a man. How do you know? He has a man's voice. Oh, such a lovely man's voice. This is what happens. When he comes to the opera, it's usually in the middle of the first act, he gives 3 little taps on the door of box 5. The first time I heard those 3 taps, when I knew there was no one in the box, you can think how puzzled I was. I opened the door, listened, looked. Nobody. And then I've heard a voice say, "Madame Jules, my poor husband's name was Jules, a footstool, please." Saving your presence, gentlemen, it made me feel all overish like. But the voice went on. Don't be frightened, Madame Jules. I'm the opera ghost. And the voice was so soft and kind that I hardly felt frightened. The voice was sitting in the corner chair on the right, in the front row. Was there anyone in the box on the right of box 5? Asked Moncharmin. No. Box 7 and box 3, the one on the left, were both empty. The curtain had only just gone up. And what did you do? Well, I brought the footstool, of course. Of course it wasn't for himself he wanted it, but for his lady. But I never heard her, nor saw her. Eh? What? So now the ghost is married? The eyes of the 2 managers traveled from Madame Giry to the inspector, who, standing behind the box-keeper, was waving his arms to attract their attention. He tapped his forehead with a distressful forefinger to convey his opinion that the widow Jules Giry was most certainly mad, a piece of pantomime which confirmed Monsieur Richard in his determination to get rid of an inspector who kept a lunatic in his service. Meanwhile, the worthy lady went on about her ghost, now painting his generosity. At the time of the performance, he always gives me 2 francs, sometimes 5, sometimes 10, when he has been many days without coming. Only since people have begun to annoy him again, he gives me nothing at all. Excuse me, my good woman, said Moncharmin, while Madame Giry tossed the feathers in her dingy hat at this persistent familiarity. Excuse me, how does the ghost manage to give you your 2 francs? Why, he leaves them on the little shelf in the box, of course. I find them with the program, which I always give him. Some evenings I find flowers in the box, a rose that must have dropped from his lady's bodice, for he brings a lady with him sometimes. One day they left a fan behind them. Oh, the ghost left a fan, did he? And what did you do with it? Well, I brought it back to the box next night. Here the inspector's voice was raised. You've broken the rules. I shall have to fine you, Madame Giry. Hold your tongue, you fool, muttered Monsieur Firmin Richard. You brought back the fan. And then? Well, then they took it away with them, sir. It was not there at the end of the performance, and in its place they left me a box of English sweets, which I'm very fond of. That's one of the ghost's pretty thoughts. That will do, Madame Giry. You can go. When Madame Giry had bowed herself out, with the dignity that never deserted her, the manager told the inspector that they had decided to dispense with that old madwoman's services, and, when he had gone in his turn, they instructed the acting manager to make up the inspector's accounts. Left alone, the managers told each other of the idea which they had in mind, which was that they should look into the little matter of Box 5 themselves. End of chapter 4. Okay, so chapter 4. We have our new managers, Moncharmin and Richard, and they don't really pay attention to the rules of box 5 in that it needs to be left open for the opera ghost. And so a couple times it has been sold. And the ghost, thinking that it's just a misunderstanding, actually writes to the old owners, to the old managers, to be like, hey, did you not show the new managers the memorandum, and do they not know that like box 5 is mine? And the new owner or the old owners like indicate that yeah, they definitely showed the memorandum. So Opera Ghost writes to the new managers, Moncharmin and Richard, and is like, so I thought it was like a mistake that they had been sold, and then you like left it open for me, and I was very excited because thank you. You now you know that it was for me. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I understand that, you know, new place, new rules, that type of thing. This is where I will expect my payments. Like, I'll let you know about it. The old managers have already paid through the certain time, so like this is what is due next. And the new managers are like, well, this is obviously like the old managers continuing on a joke, and they just don't know when to end the joke because it's not funny anymore. So they do sell box 5 again. And that night, weird things happen in box 5. A disturbance, shall we say. And there is a note that is left for the managers the next day to talk about this. And they actually had to ask the people to leave. And they were disturbing people, and the, not the box keeper, but the, I don't know, somebody, I forgot the title. But this person went in during the first act, and then at the beginning of the showing, and then, you know, a little bit later in like the second act or the first part of the first act. I don't know. He went there twice. And what has happened is just weird. Like the people are laughing and just being very weird and disruptive. And he goes into the box and he's like, you guys just have to calm down. Like the boxes surrounding you have complained, and like everybody's telling you to be quiet. So please stop. And so he leaves, and immediately there's more laughter and more ruckus. So he goes back in there and like makes sure that they actually leave. And the owners are like, okay, well, that's weird. So they ask for the constable, I guess, I don't really know, the untitled man that I can't remember, to actually relate what has happened. And he's like basically says the same thing, like, this is what happened, I went in there, asked them to leave, blah blah blah. And they're like, okay, but like, did you see the ghost? And they're like, no. And the new managers are like, okay, well, we obviously can't keep people who aren't like, who are going crazy. So they also ask for the box keeper, the ticket person, to come in and relate what had happened last night. And it is good old little Meg Geary's mom, and she's talking about what has happened that night. And it, you know, syncs up with what our other friend has our other friend has said, and Madame Geary is like, oh, okay, you don't know yet. Well, and then relates specific instances that have happened in the past with Isidore Sack like breaking his leg as he's like running out of the building, and then also with the old manager having been like possessed of some sort or driven mad of some sort. And so she's like, you just really need to be careful. You just got to be careful because this is happening. And she's never seen him. But he always asks for a footstool if he's bringing a lady with him, and sometimes the opera ghost leaves a tip for her, which is really nice. Sometimes he's left her like chocolates and candies, also really nice. And so like she's on good terms with this opera ghost basically, which I love that for her. I love that, and I want that for all of us. Um and so at the end of it, the new managers are like, they dismiss, Madame Geary and what's his name, and then they decide that they themselves need to look into box 5 to see what's really going on. I'm interested. I'm enjoying it so far. I am enjoying it so far. This is the first read for me. I said this at the beginning, but this is the first read for me, and I have not seen any adaptations either. So no adaptations, haven't seen the musical, haven't seen the movies, any of them. And so this is like a new story for me. And I am enjoying it so far. The only thing I really know about it is the mask, which I feel like everybody knows about a mask. And I feel like there's lots of candles involved and something with a chandelier. That is all I know. So I am enjoying it so far. I am enjoying the atmosphere. I'm enjoying the like disbelief that the new managers have. I also really appreciate how this story is being told, and that some of it is from memoirs of one of the managers. And I just think that's really interesting. It's interesting storytelling, and I like it. I like it. It keeps it in interesting, for lack of a better word for me to come up with. But our next chapter is long, so we're not gonna have time for that tonight. So we're gonna stop here tonight, and we will pick up right where we left off. We are about to start chapter 5. We are 17% of the way through, so we are in for a bit of time. But that's it. We'll be back very, very soon. I hope you all have a great night. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. If I do not see you next time, I hope to see you even sooner. Bye, friends.